Anthony Miller needed this role, badly. Years of bit parts and almost theirs had worn him down, like water on stone. His reflection showed more lines than his resume. Then came The Devil's Due, a horror film whispered about in hushed, excited tones across Hollywood. The role was Father Michael, a priest wrestling with a demonic entity, a man losing his soul inch by bloody inch. Anthony felt a strange pull, a morbid curiosity. He went to the audition. He read the lines. The casting director, a woman with eyes that seemed to see too much, nodded slowly. "You are Father Michael," she'd said, a statement, not a question. He felt a thrill, cold and sharp. He got the part. The news came on a Tuesday, a gray, listless day suddenly electrified. He called his daughter Lee, his voice cracking with a joy he hadn't felt in years. That night he sat with the script, a heavy tome bound in faux leather. The words seemed to swim before his tired eyes. For a fleeting moment, under the dim light of his reading lamp, the typed letters appeared to writhe, to twist into something ancient and unreadable. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. Nerves, he told himself. Just nerves and too much coffee. But a small, cold seed of unease had been planted deep within him, in the fertile soil of his desperation. The first day on set was unnerving. The film was being shot in an old, deconsecrated church on the city's forgotten outskirts, St. Augustine's. Its stone walls wept condensation, and the air within was colder than the autumn chill outside. Colder by far. Alistair Finch, the director, was a gaunt man with an intense, unblinking stare. He spoke of authenticity, of capturing the raw terror of possession. He wanted Anthony to live the role, to breathe it. The stained glass windows, depicting saints in various states of martyrdom, seemed to watch with faded, sorrowful eyes. Anthony felt a prickle on his skin, a sense of being observed by something unseen. During one of the early scenes where Father Michael first feels the insidious touch of the demon, Anthony stumbled. He knew the lines, he had drilled them for weeks, yet they turned to ash in his mouth. "Cut!" Finch's voice, sharp as a shard of glass. On the third take, as Anthony recited a prayer, a sound ripped from his throat. It was low, guttural, a snarl that didn't belong to him. The boom operator frowned, tapping his headphones. "What was that, Tony?" he asked. Anthony forced a laugh. "Just clearing my throat. Bit of a frog in there." But the sound had been wet, ancient, and it hadn't felt like his own. The incidents, small at first, began to accumulate like flies on a rotting carcass. Anthony would be in his trailer, the script open before him. He'd try to focus on Father Michael's anguish, his piety. Then, without warning, his tongue would twist. Dark, sibilant Latin phrases, a language he'd never studied, would spill from his lips, unbidden and chillingly fluent. He'd clap a hand over his mouth, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Exhaustion, he'd tell himself. The pressure of the role. But the words felt old, older than sin, and they left a coppery taste in his mouth like old blood. His reflection became a source of quiet horror. He'd catch glimpses of himself in dusty mirrors on set or in the polished chrome of the coffee machine. Sometimes, for a fraction of a second, the face looking back wasn't quite his. A subtle shift in the eyes, a predatory gleam, a curl to the lip that was more sneer than smile. He'd splash cold water on his face, scrubbing at his skin as if to wash away an invisible stain. But the feeling lingered, a cold shadow clinging to his thoughts, a whisper that he was no longer entirely alone within his own skin. It was a terrifying intimacy. A creeping dread began to infect the set itself. Accidents, small and then not so small, became unnervingly common. A heavy Klieg light, triple-checked for safety, suddenly crashed to the ground, mere feet from where the makeup artist was working. Electrical systems flickered and died with alarming regularity, plunging the set into momentary, terrifying darkness, especially during the more intense possession sequences. One of the generators outside the old church began to emit a high-pitched whine, then billowed acrid black smoke before sputtering into silence. The air grew thick with unspoken fears. The crew muttered about a jinx. During a scene where Father Michael, clutching a rosary, attempts to fight off the demonic presence, The prop beads in Anthony's hand grew suddenly, impossibly hot. He cried out, a genuine sound of pain, dropping the rosary as if it were a burning coal. It clattered onto the dusty floorboards, smoking faintly. A small, angry red welt bloomed on his palm. The air around the discarded rosary seemed to shimmer, and a faint, unmistakable scent of sulfur hung in the air. Finch looked intrigued. The crew looked terrified. Anthony stared at his hand, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This wasn't in the script. Lee, Anthony's 16-year-old daughter, came to visit the set one afternoon, a rare treat. She found him in his trailer, but the man who turned to greet her was a stranger. His eyes, usually warm and crinkling at the corners when he smiled, were now hollow pits, shadowed and distant. When he spoke, his voice was rougher, deeper, and an unfamiliar cruelty edged his words when she asked a simple question about the filming. He snapped, his patience gone. This man looked like her father, sounded mostly like him, but the essence, the kindness she knew, was absent. A cold fear, sharp and sudden, pierced through her. At home the change became even more pronounced. Her father, once a man of easy laughter and comforting presence, became a shadow. He was withdrawn, spending hours locked in his study, the door shut tight against her. Other times a frightening volatility would surface. He'd rage over trivial things, his voice booming with an unnatural resonance. One night, drawn by a low, rhythmic sound, Lee crept to his study door. Through the keyhole, she saw him. He was standing in the center of the room, swaying slightly, muttering in that same low, guttural language she'd heard whispers of on set. His shadow on the wall behind him was elongated, monstrous. Terror, cold and absolute, became Lee's constant companion. This wasn't method acting. This wasn't her father succumbing to the pressures of a demanding role. This was something else. Something older, something evil. Driven by a desperate need to understand, to save him, she began to dig. She searched online, her fingers flying across the keyboard, chasing down rumors about the devil's due. She found old newspaper clippings, archived forum discussions, half-forgotten blog posts. The script, she discovered with a sickening lurch, wasn't entirely fiction. It was loosely based on a real exorcism, a case from the 1970s, obscure and horrifying. The original case had involved a young priest, much like Father Michael. The exorcism had been a disaster. The entity, it was said, was never truly vanquished. It had clung on, lying dormant, waiting. The old texts she found warned that this particular demon had a peculiar affinity for those who reenacted its torments, those who gave it voice and form. The script, with its meticulously researched rituals and incantations, wasn't just a story, it was an invitation, a key turning in an ancient lock. Her father wasn't just playing a part, he was opening a door, and something was stepping through. Armed with her terrifying discovery, Lee confronted Alistair Finch. She pleaded with him, her voice trembling, laying out the articles, the warnings. Finch listened, his expression unreadable, a faint, almost predatory smile playing on his lips. "My dear Lee," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "your father is a consummate professional, a brilliant method actor. This intensity, this is his gift. He is simply giving the performance of a lifetime." But as he spoke, Lee saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not concern, but a dark, unsettling excitement. Even Finch, she realized, was beginning to sense the unscripted terror. The climax of the film was the exorcism scene itself. Anthony, as Father Michael, was strapped to a specially constructed bed. As the cameras rolled and the actor playing the young exorcist began the rites, something shifted. Anthony's convulsions were no longer staged. They were violent, bone-jarring spasms that strained against the leather restraints. The prop straps, thick and sturdy, creaked and then snapped with loud cracks. His body arched, levitating several inches off the bed, a feat no wirework could explain. His voice, when he spoke, was not his own. It was a legion, a chorus of derisive, ancient voices that filled the cold church with pure malice. The special effects crew stood by, their equipment untouched, their faces pale with dawning horror. The few religious artifacts brought onto the set by the film's theological consultant, a nervous, chain-smoking priest, began to react. A crucifix on the bedside table vibrated, then blackened as if touched by fire. A vial of holy water sizzled and shattered, its contents evaporating into a foul-smelling steam. The actor playing the exorcist, a veteran of countless horror films, suddenly screamed, a raw, unfeigned shriek of terror, and scrambled backwards, tripping over cables, fleeing the set as if the hounds of hell were at his heels. The cameras, however, continued to roll, their operators frozen, capturing every unholy moment. This was no longer a movie, it was a document. The final scene shot that day, which became the film's horrifying, unplanned ending, was a close-up. Anthony, or the thing wearing his face, turned its head slowly, impossibly, to stare directly into the primary camera lens. A smile stretched its lips, a smile of ancient evil and utter triumph. There was no trace of Anthony Miller left in those eyes, only a cold, knowing abyss. The line between the dedicated actor and the malevolent entity, between meticulously crafted fiction and a soul-destroying reality, had not just blurred, it had been utterly, terrifyingly annihilated. The film would be a sensation. The audience would praise the realism. Lee knew they would be watching not a performance but a possession, a victory cry from the darkness.